Due to recent updates, the Dryleaf Arts are now incredible because not only do their attacks happen much quicker, but they have also been granted additional power. These two buffs alone have made this weapon now more than viable, certainly a lot more versatile, and now of course extremely fun to use in your games. So if you want to have a load of fun breaking the hardest bosses in the games with just your bare fists, let me show you how to create the new and improved build around the Dryleaf Arts. Now, just before we delve into the build itself, I do just want to point out that everything I'm going to say in this video will apply to both the Dryleaf Arts hand-to-hand item and also Dane's footwork. Essentially, these are two different weapons that you can pick up throughout the DLC, which are tied to Dane the NPC himself, and they are essentially the same weapon, just one will be punching your enemies, whereas the other one will be kicking your enemies. So again, just to reiterate, if you want to use the Dryleaf Arts to basically punch your enemies to death, you can apply this build to that weapon, but if you want to go around kicking everybody instead with Dane's footwork, you can also apply this build to Dane's footwork. And of course, I should let you know how you even get both of those items, and without spoiling anything, Dane's footwork is something that you are naturally going to get by completing the DLC. Essentially, you need to progress pretty much all the way to the final boss, because just before the final boss will be a certain fighting scene, and afterwards you will be presented with Dane's footwork, but you can also get the Dryleaf Art much quicker because you get these as a reward for beating Dane at Morph Ruins. Essentially, when you make your way to the Shadow Altus area of the DLC, you will be able to come to the High Road Cross Site of Grace, where both Leda and also the Hornsent will be standing, and basically in between those two characters will be multiple items you can pick up. One of the items that you'll be able to pick up is actually one of the letters left by Dane, as well as a brand new gesture called May the Best Win. And then if you actually head east towards Morph Ruins, you will be able to find Dane himself residing at the Morph Ruin Site of Grace, where if you talk to him, he doesn't really say anything, but if you use that gesture in front of him, he will then accept that as a challenge for a 1v1, and like I said earlier, as long as you beat him here, when you teleport back, you will then be granted with the Dryleaf Arts. Again, just one little thing that I want to point out here is whether you're going to use the Dryleaf Arts or Dane's footwork, I highly recommend that you get the Dryleaf Arts, and the reason for that is because they come with the actual physical item for the Ash of War Palm Blast, which is naturally applied to both weapons, but where the Dryleaf Arts has the actual physical Ash of War, that means we can either take it off or apply it to other weapons, but more importantly, apply different affinities to whatever weapon we apply it to. So essentially, when you get the Dryleaf Arts, you can then reapply this Ash of War to either the Dryleaf Arts or Dane's footwork, but then change the weapon into either a cold, bleed, fire, or even poison variant, giving this weapon an additional buff in battle. I will just point out, for the majority of the fights that you're going to be seeing in the background, I did apply bleed to Dane's footwork, as I was in New Game Plus 4, and bleed is kind of integral for most fights in the later New Game Pluses, but there were times where I did change it into a cold affinity, or even added the flame art version, especially for people like Radagon, and even still they were destroying everything no matter what affinity I'd put on. So a quick little hot tip for you with these weapons is basically change the affinity to best go against whatever opponent you're coming up against, because again, in that same example, Radagon doesn't bleed, so having it in a blood affinity is going to be pointless, but then having something like cold or a flame art version of the weapon to fight him with is going to be so much better, as you can apply Frostbite to Radagon, and of course Flame Art or fire damage is just basically free additional damage against him. But again, no matter what affinity or how you set up the weapons, the stats are always going to remain the same, and I'm just going to throw them up on screen for you now. And as always, it is a level 150 character with these builds, and as you can see, we've got 50 points worth of vigor, 14 mind, 21 endurance, 50 strength, 41 dexterity, 10 intelligence, 33 faith, and then 10 arcane. And this will basically be the best coverage with no matter what affinity you're using to get the best damage out of the weapon. When you fully upgrade either the Dryleaf Arts or Dane's footwork, they essentially become a C rated scaling in both strength and dexterity, so basically a lesser quality build is required to get the best damage out of them, but of course that will drop depending on what affinity you apply, but typically only drops down to a D rated scaling. But even with that in mind, you're probably seeing me deal sort of around 500-600 damage just naturally with the weapons anyway, but more importantly doing upwards of sort of 3,000 to 4,000 damage with a fully charged Ash of War. So by having a healthy split into strength and dexterity, that is how you're going to be doing the best damage with these weapons. And then of course the 33 Faith is there to allow us to use both Golden Vow and also Howl of Shibiri as our buffs, because again with Howl of Shibiri we can also proc other items like the Black Dumpling Helm, Maddening Hand and H1's Exaltation to give us an added buff to damage if it's necessary. But then if you wanted to up this build a little bit more and delve into a higher level character, because I know some of you do, here is a guide for a level 200 version of this build, and essentially we just increase our vigor a little bit more as well as our strength and dexterity stats just to survive a bit better and of course get more damage out of these weapons. And you've probably noticed that I've been focusing a little bit more into strength than I have dexterity, because fun fact, with strength that actually boosts your physical defense a lot more as well. So of course where we're going to be getting a similar damage output whether we put our stats into strength or dexterity, it's actually beneficial to pump more into strength just to get that additional damage negation. But again, to help with our damage output, no matter whether you're using a level 150 build or a level 200 plus build, I highly recommend that you run these talismans, because these are going to give you the best coverage, again, no matter what affinity you have tied to these weapons. So as you can see, we are running both Millicent's Prosthesis and the Rotund Winged Insignia, and both of them are tied to Millicent's quest. So if you're in your base new game, feel free to swap the Rotund Winged Insignia out for just the regular Winged Insignia. But essentially we're using 2 lots of successive damage output buffs, because it's very easy now to proc those with the Dryleaf Art, especially now with the buff to speed and light heavy attacks. And then of course Millicent's Prosthesis is giving us a +5 in dexterity, just naturally boosting our damage output anyway. But then we're also running the Shard of Alexander and Godfrey's Icon, because as I quickly hinted earlier, the main damaging part of this weapon is going to be the insane Ash of War, which is of course that Palm Blast that I mentioned earlier, because not only is it chargeable so we can make use of Godfrey's Icon, but when you are charging and when you do charge this Ash of War, not only do you also have hyper armor whilst you're charging it, allowing you to trade against enemies, you will then unleash a massive AoE effect, which you've probably seen in the background already, that will not only be capable of doing upwards of 4,000-5,000 damage, but will also be doing 36 points worth of stance damage. That stance damage is essentially the same as a charged heavy on most greatswords and things like hammers, which are notorious for being some of the best stance breaking weapons. So although it is a little bit slower to pull that full thing off and get it fully charged to do that AoE effect, it actually does have quite a big range, and as I said earlier, gives you some form of hyper armor, meaning you can trade. So if you have been sort of like pummeling away your enemy for quite some time, or managed to get the spacing down where you can unleash that and hit them with the AoE multiple times, you'll very easily break enemy stances, bringing even the hardest bosses to the floor, obviously allowing you to do many critical hits. But of course we still also have our Wonder Physick options, and again, no matter whether you're using the level 150 stats or the level 200 stats, I highly recommend that you use the Strength Knock tier and the Dexterity Knock tier to get the best possible damage that you can out of this weapon. But if you are in your later new game pluses or happen to be a high enough level to basically max out strength and dexterity, you can basically interchange both the Stone Barb Crack tier and the Thorny Crack tier in to of course help you break enemy stances if you are running the Stone Barb Crack tier, but also deal additional damage in quick succession with the Thorny Crack tier. So essentially feel free to mix and match those 4 tiers. They're going to be the best options for you in this build. And then again, for armor, I know I haven't really said anything about it yet, but I am using the Dryleaf armor set just to essentially fit with the theme of the video basically. But where we've got 21 endurance and where the Dryleaf arts basically weigh nothing, you can essentially run whatever armor set you would like. So if you want to delve into a much heavier armor set, feel free to do so. All I will say is be careful if you're running the Rakshasa armor set, because where we are going to be trading a lot, especially if you're using the Ash of War, you can get caught out with the damage negation that happens whilst you're attacking when wearing the Rakshasa armor. So if you just wanted to wear just a nice decent armor that's going to save you a lot more than what the Dryleaf armor did for me whilst making this video, feel free to do that, because it's definitely going to be a much safer option, especially for the DLC. But once you've got all of that combined, like I said at the very beginning of this video, the Dryleaf Arts or the Dane's footwork are extremely fun to use, especially now that they're a lot more usable than what they were. So if you haven't used them since the launch of the DLC, definitely make sure you give them another go now. And of course, this is the best build to make around them. And just like that, that is another killer build for you guys to go and try out. Obviously, like I said at the end of all of these videos, let me know what you think about the Dryleaf Arts, or the hand-to-hand combats if you will, because I know they are still a little bit of a mixed bag, where some people absolutely love them, but others still feel they're a bit meh. I personally, I'm really loving them, but I'm probably glazing a lot because I've just wanted these weapons to be good from the very beginning, so any buff they would have received would have been basically a godsend for me, so maybe I'm being a little bit biased, but like I say, let me know what you think in the comments down below, and you guys also know the drill by now. Whilst you're down there, if you happen to like this video or it's helped you out in any way, definitely make sure you hit that like button too, because that not only helps out the channel tremendously, but it genuinely is the best and easiest way to let me know that you enjoy these powerful build videos and want to see more in the future. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel or think that you're subscribed, do just double check and make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. We are on the way to 35,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you want to help us reach that goal, like I say, make sure you hit that button down below. But other than that, I believe I have said everything that I need to say about these weapons, guys. Just make sure you definitely use the right affinities for the right enemies. Basically, keep these as a bleed option for most of the base game and most of the DLC, but then move into cold and fire to beat the respective bosses that are immune to bleed, and I'm sure you'll be absolutely fine. But let me know either way how you get on if you do happen to use them. But otherwise, I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I guess I will catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.